The ring rope creaked under the drunk fighter's weight as he stepped through, canvas squeaking beneath heavy boots that had no business on training ground. His laugh echoed too loud in the mid-1980s Hong Kong boxing gym, cutting through the steady rhythm of leather on heavy bags and the metallic ping of speed bags. The ordinary sounds of evening training seemed to thin, as if the very air knew something was about to shift. From his corner position, the cutman folded his towel with practiced precision, the same way he'd done it for 15 years. The fabric held memories of countless cuts sealed, countless fighters saved from permanent damage by his steady hands. His metal tin clicked shut with a sound that seemed too sharp in the growing tension. Inside, gauze pads lay organized like ammunition. Petroleum jelly waited in small containers, and ice picks rested beside antiseptic bottles. The small fan rattled overhead, and somewhere in the shadows between hanging bags, sweat dripped from a chain with metronomic persistence. Subscribe to Jackie Chan, the untold legacy for the real stories of mastery, control, and the moments that proved why Jackie became a legend. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the untold chapters of how true martial arts mastery works. The gym itself told stories through its scars. Frosted windows filtered neon streetlight into amber pools on worn wooden floors. Heavy bags hung like massive fruit from reinforced ceiling beams, their leather surfaces polished smooth by years of gloved fists. Speed bags danced on their platforms with different rhythms, quick staccato from experienced hands, uneven thumping from beginners still learning the music of timing. Jackie stood near the ring's edge, not dressed like a boxer, just a visitor in street clothes, but something in his stillness suggested he was reading the room differently than everyone else. He watched the drunk fighter's footing, the way weight shifted unevenly from one leg to another, the slight sway that alcohol creates in even the most muscular frame. The man was clearly built like a fighter, broad shoulders, thick arms, hands that had seen their share of contact. But alcohol had transformed strength into liability, precision into stumbling aggression. The drunk fighter pointed at Jackie with theatrical force. "You, movie star, let's see if you're real or just camera tricks." His words slurred slightly, but the challenge was clear enough. The provocation hung in the humid air like incense, drawing other gym members closer. A young boxer stopped his rope work to watch. An older trainer set down his stopwatch. Someone's hand tapped against the ring rope, creating a hollow drumbeat that turned the space into an impromptu arena. The cutman had seen this scenario unfold dozens of times over his career. A drunk challenges a known fighter. The fighter either backs down and looks weak, or accepts and risks serious injury to an impaired opponent. Either way, the situation rarely ended well. Insurance claims, police reports, damaged reputations, all the complications that came when ego met alcohol in a space designed for controlled violence. Jackie paused. Not the hesitation of fear, but the stillness of assessment. The cutman recognized it immediately. The same quality he'd seen in championship fighters who knew exactly when to move and when to wait. It was the pause of a chess master seeing 12 moves ahead, understanding that the first move would determine everything that followed. Jackie's answer came without insult or ego, just a slight adjustment of his position that seemed almost casual. But the cutman's trained eye caught the subtlety. Jackie had shifted his weight to his back foot, creating space without appearing to retreat. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, but his stance had become something the cutman had never seen in a boxing ring. Not quite fighting position, not quite surrender, something entirely different. The drunk fighter lunged forward, expecting resistance, expecting Jackie to meet aggression with aggression. Boxing gyms trained fighters to respond to attack with counterattack, to answer force with force. Instead, Jackie stepped to an angle that made the lunge miss entirely. Not a dramatic dodge, not the kind of movement that would look impressive on camera, just a subtle shift that used the ring's geometry like a dance partner. The canvas edge became a boundary. The rope became a guide, but neither became a weapon. The cutman watched with growing fascination as Jackie seemed to be conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Every movement was economical, purposeful, designed not to dominate, but to deflect. It was like watching water flow around a stone. No resistance, no confrontation, just the natural path of least friction. The drunk fighter threw another wild haymaker, the kind of punch that would have devastated any stationary target. But Jackie wasn't where the punch expected him to be. He'd moved perhaps 6 inches, just enough to let the fist sail past his ear. The displacement was so minimal, it seemed almost accidental. But the cutman's experienced eye recognized precision, disguised as coincidence. The cutman's trained attention caught what others missed. The drunk fighter's timing was sloppy. His weight shifts telegraphed seconds before each movement. Alcohol had turned his body into a poorly tuned instrument. All the notes slightly off, all the rhythms just behind the beat. Instinctively, the cutman reached for ice from his metal tin, then realized he was watching something entirely different. Jackie wasn't preventing impact through blocking or striking. He was preventing it through positioning. A young boxer near the ropes whispered to his training partner, "Is this really happening?" The scene had an almost surreal quality, like watching a master calligrapher work with invisible ink. Every stroke looked effortless, but the result was undeniably artful. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jackie guided the fighter's momentum toward the ropes, not through force, but through space. It was like watching someone redirect a river by moving the banks rather than damming the water. A shoulder slipped past where Jackie had been standing. A foot skidded on canvas that offered no purchase for aggressive movement. The drunk fighter found himself off balance, grasping at air, while Jackie remained centered and untouched. The cutman had worked corners for champions, had seen fighters with lightning reflexes and devastating power. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't about being faster or stronger or more skilled in conventional terms. This was about understanding physics at a level that transcended athletic ability. Jackie was using the drunk fighter's own energy against him, not through judo throws or wrestling takedowns, but through pure spatial manipulation. The crowd's energy shifted like weather before a storm. Laughter drained from faces as observers began to understand they weren't watching a fight. They were watching mastery of something far more sophisticated than simple combat. The drunk fighter's confidence collapsed because nothing he threw found its target. Not because he was blocked, but because the target simply wasn't where physics said it should be. An older trainer, a man who'd seen 40 years of boxing, shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured to himself, but in the gym's growing quiet, his words carried. The cutman nodded unconsciously. He'd witnessed career-ending knockouts, miraculous comebacks, displays of courage and heart that redefined what he thought possible. But this was different. This was art disguised as avoidance. The drunk fighter swung again, wider this time, desperation creeping into his movement. Jackie responded by stepping backward and slightly to the left, a movement so natural it looked like casual conversation rather than combat avoidance. The swing missed by what seemed like inches, but the cutman understood that those inches were precisely calculated. The distance, exactly what Jackie had intended. The metal tin in the cutman's hands clicked softly as his fingers unconsciously adjusted his grip. He'd prepared for cuts that never came, swelling that never developed, bleeding that never started. His towel remained folded, unused, a white flag of surrender to conventional expectations of how confrontations end. Jackie's next gesture carried more power than any punch the cutman had ever seen thrown. His hands opened, palms visible, in a signal that said, "Enough," without shame or humiliation. It wasn't a gesture of submission or superiority. It was an invitation to step back from the edge of something unnecessary. He stepped back, returning the ring to its intended purpose, offering the drunk fighter dignity in defeat by treating it not as defeat, but as a lesson in physics. The drunk fighter stood in the center of the ring, breathing heavily from exertion rather than injury, looking around at faces that had transformed from anticipation to something approaching reverence. He'd wanted to expose Jackie as a fraud, to prove that movie star martial arts were just camera tricks and special effects. Instead, he'd encountered something that couldn't be faked because it operated according to principles more fundamental than showmanship. The fan noise returned gradually, like sound recovering after an explosion. Heavy bags resumed their thudding percussion as fighters tentatively returned to training routines. The cutman opened his tin for real work elsewhere in the gym, where fighters were actually training instead of performing, where cuts and bruises required his attention. Life continued, but something had been demonstrated that went beyond entertainment. The drunk fighter climbed through the ropes slowly. His aggression deflated, not through violence, but through its complete absence. Several gym members offered him water, a towel, simple gestures of community that suggested the confrontation had ended without creating enemies. The cutman watched him accept these offerings with something approaching grace, the alcohol-fueled bravado replaced by confusion and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. Later, as the cutman wiped down equipment and refolded towels, he found himself thinking about what he'd witnessed. The drunk fighter had wanted a show, had demanded proof of Jackie's abilities. Instead of giving him violence, Jackie had given him geometry. Instead of proving his strength, Jackie had demonstrated his control. But more than that, he'd shown that true mastery could transform a potentially ugly situation into something approaching beauty. The lesson settled in the cutman's mind like medicine. Mastery isn't about winning fights. It's about ending them before they become dangerous. It's about reading momentum and redirecting it. It's about understanding that the most powerful technique is often the one that prevents the need for any technique at all. The greatest victory is the one that leaves everyone intact. The ring rope hung still now, no longer creaking under the weight of misplaced aggression. The canvas showed scuff marks from the evening's legitimate training, but no bloodstains, no evidence of violence. The cutman's metal tin sat ready for the next real emergency, while his towel waited, folded precisely, for the next genuine need. Everything was exactly as it had been an hour before, except that everyone present had seen something that would change how they understood the relationship between strength and wisdom. As the gym prepared to close, one question lingered in the humid air, like a challenge yet to be answered. If Jackie could dissolve a confrontation in a boxing ring through pure spatial awareness and timing, what would happen when the same technique was needed on a movie set, where the floor offered no forgiveness for mistakes and the cameras captured every moment of truth or failure? The drunk fighter had stumbled out into the neon-lit Hong Kong streets, probably not understanding what had just happened to him. He'd come looking for spectacle and found something else entirely, a demonstration that real mastery looks nothing like what most people expect. It doesn't announce itself with noise or drama. It simply is, present and effective, like water finding the path of least resistance. Jackie gathered his things quietly, nodding to the cutman and a few other regulars. No words were exchanged about what had occurred. In this gym, as in many places where real skill was developed, the most important lessons were often taught without speaking, understood through observation rather than explanation. The cutman appreciated this silence. Words would have diminished what had happened, would have tried to reduce it to simple categories when its power lay precisely in its refusal to be categorized. The cutman continued his end-of-day routine, cleaning equipment and checking supplies. His metal tin clicked open and shut as he organized bandages and antiseptic. Preparing for tomorrow's legitimate injuries, cuts from training, bruises from sparring, the honest damage that came from people pushing themselves to improve. Each item in his kit had its purpose, its role in the ecosystem of controlled violence that kept fighters safe while they learned their craft. But tonight's lesson would stick with him longer than most medical treatments he'd administered. He'd watched someone dissolve violence through understanding rather than force, neutralize aggression through positioning rather than power. It was a masterclass in control that most martial artists never achieve, let alone demonstrate under pressure from an unpredictable drunk in front of witnesses who expected blood. The drunk fighter's challenge had been answered, but not in the way anyone expected. Jackie hadn't proven he could fight. He'd proven he didn't need to. That distinction, the cutman realized, was what separated true martial artists from mere fighters. Anyone could learn to throw punches. Very few could learn to make punches unnecessary. Even fewer could demonstrate that principle when challenged publicly, when reputation and ego were on the line. As the last light bulbs clicked off and the gym settled into darkness, the ring remained. Tomorrow, it would host legitimate training again, young fighters learning footwork and combinations, developing the skills that might someday give them the confidence to walk away from pointless confrontations rather than into them. The cutman hoped some of them would remember tonight, would understand that true power looked nothing like what they'd expected. The cutman locked up, his towel folded and his tin secure. Outside, Hong Kong hummed with its usual intensity, neon signs advertising everything from dim sum to electronics, traffic flowing like blood through the city's concrete arteries. But inside the gym, a different kind of energy lingered, the memory of mastery demonstrated not through violence, but through its opposite, the kind of control that makes violence obsolete. Walking toward the subway station, the cutman passed dozens of people who had no idea what they'd missed. A lesson in physics and philosophy, delivered without words in a language older than any human speech. The drunk fighter had wanted to expose weakness and had instead witnessed a strength so complete it could afford to be gentle. Jackie had turned a challenge into a gift, a confrontation into a teaching moment, a potential disaster into something approaching grace. The cutman descended into the subway, his metal tin clicking softly against his side with each step. The sound echoed off tunnel walls that had witnessed countless journeys, countless stories of people carrying their experiences through the arteries of the city. Tomorrow, he would return to the gym, would tend to the cuts and bruises of fighters who sought improvement through honest combat. But tonight, he carried with him the memory of something rarer, the sight of true mastery revealing itself not through what it did, but through what it chose not to do. In the years that followed, the cutman would witness many more encounters at the gym. He would see young fighters learn the hard lessons of timing and distance. He would tend to bruises and cuts, would apply ice to swelling and bandages to wounds. But he would never again see anything quite like what happened that evening when Jackie transformed a challenge into a teaching moment without saying a word. Sometimes, late at night when the gym was empty and he was finishing his preparations for the next day, the cutman would stand in that same ring and remember. He would fold his towel in exactly the same way, would organize his metal tin with the same precision, would listen to the fan rattling overhead, and he would think about the lesson he'd learned from watching a masterwork, that true strength doesn't need to prove itself, true skill doesn't need to dominate, and true wisdom knows when not to use the power it possesses. The drunk fighter had wanted to expose Jackie as a fraud, to pull back the curtain on movie magic and reveal the ordinary man beneath. Instead, he discovered something far more impressive than any choreographed fight scene, the real-world application of principles so refined they seemed to operate outside normal physical laws. Jackie had shown him, and everyone watching, that mastery wasn't about what you could do to someone else. It was about what you could choose not to do, even when provoked, even when challenged, even when your reputation hung in the balance. And in that small Hong Kong boxing gym, surrounded by the honest smell of sweat and effort, witnessed by people who understood the difference between real skill and performance, A lesson had been taught that would outlast any movie role or public appearance. The cutman carried that lesson with him, a reminder that the most powerful demonstrations of strength often look nothing like strength at all.